if artists don't feel like these spaces were created for them to feel safe to create something radical that could change minds, like that's the whole point of having a gallery is to create those spaces for artists. So if that's no longer what the space is there for, and it's just a commercial facade, that looks really trendy, then that's not really doing its job anymore.
Hello, and welcome back to the MO podcast. My name is Jonathan Neal, and I am here as always with my co-host Joey Flores. And today it is our distinct pleasure to welcome Storm Ascher to the podcast. Storm is a writer, curator, philanthropist, and a founder. Primarily right now, she is the force behind Superposition Gallery, which she started at the ripe age of 24. Superposition is a pioneer of the nomadic gallery model with no fixed location. Last year, Superposition mounted shows in London, Miami, New York, Santo Domingo, and Marrakesh. Take that, Gagosian. And next month, Superposition will be at Expo Chicago with new work by Damian Davis. Storm is also the founder of the Hamptons Black Arts Council, a nonprofit organization that supports the legacy of Black arts institutions on the East End of Long Island. She was a Forbes Art and Style 30 Under 30 honoree and has been featured in probably every major art and style publication at this point. It's quite incredible if you follow her Instagram. There is not a dramatic gown or outfit that Storm has not yet worn. Storm, welcome to the MO podcast. It's great to have you on.
Thank you. I love how you embellished some of that. I
um,
appreciate it. But yeah, it's always great because also you're my former professor, so you're gassing me up a lot. So
have to always got to give it the boost. First question, as the founder of a nomadic gallery, how many frequent flyer miles do you have, and what are the best airport lounges?
Oh, that's great, actually. So I love JetBlue. And I use an Amex Platinum card that gets a priority pass. And like I link that to my mosaic tiles that are in JetBlue. And it's just been like accruing like crazy. I have actually been helping a lot of my friends join
Nice.
this. Yeah,
That's a good
said
that's a
that.
good travel hack. What
Lounges, they don't have any lounges in the domestic area of JFK, so that's always a nightmare.
uh
Um, and that's where I'm always flying out of. So
where do you what's your go-to place to hang out at JFK then before a flight?
I just try to get there as late as possible because it's so horrible. I think they're like redoing it. Hopefully, I don't know. Yeah, it just takes forever. And I never check a bag or anything because it takes forever to get even out of the airport once I get home. So yeah. And same with
Nice.
LAX. Horrible. I don't
Yes.
understand.
Yes, those to JFK and LAX I think are, if I'd be happy if Doge took those over.
Oh man.
Um, More seriously, tell us a little bit about the impetus behind superposition, and a little bit about its evolution now, as it's been growing and is becoming more of a staple of the art and cultural landscape and more well known to people.
Yeah, sure. I originally thought of superposition as this movement that I felt like a lot of people were already participating in, but they weren't necessarily calling it something, and they all felt really scattered and like it was like this big web that wasn't actually connected visually or like historically. Um, and I feel like a huge part of that was displacement and people moving around and having a more global idea of like what their influence could be on visual communication. Um, and artists didn't necessarily have to have one stable neighborhood or place to call home to have an impact. And I think now people are seeing it more so as like, oh, it's a pop-up. Um, this is kind of similar to like when Louis Vuitton will do a pop-up in Beverly Hills for a few months, and it's like this really beautiful installation, but it's a lot more research than that and more so focused on like the longevity and the landscape of the communities that we're um, activating in. So now we're seeing that people are understanding that. And it's not just this pop-up, it's how do we revisit this idea in these different places time and time again, even if we're not physically taking up space.
So I remember this so the gallery sort of, you first launched it, I think, around 2018, where it sort of first sort of got its name and began its presence in 2018. And I do remember those years leading up to it, sort of two things happening. One, there was, as you mentioned, quite a lot of, let's say peak internationalization of the art and cultural world, right? And so artists moving from one location to another, people showing in multiple different urban centers, working with a number of different galleries or exhibition platforms. And so there was this sense of kind of movement. But also at the same time, there was a big debate about gentrification and the use of the arts as a tool of gentrifying urban neighborhoods that were, from one perspective seen as underdeveloped, and from another perspective we're seen as fully developed and community-based environments. And so I'm curious, what was your thinking, or how were you thinking about superposition's place within those contexts? And then the question that I really want to get to is, how have you seen that evolve through the pandemic and then after the pandemic? Because I know that there was that moment in 2020 where it's like everyone's like, oh, it's all going to change. And right, it's like art fairs are over and people are going to get, or whatever it was going to be, right? It's like a whole different story about how people were going to be limiting the amount they would travel, and art was become much more localized and it was going to become much more community based. And of course, that was all just a bunch of bullshit, because as soon as, people could take a mask off and get on an airplane, it was like, boom, back to the status quo, if not even more supercharged. So I'm curious about how you've seen that perspective, from the perspective of superposition.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, well, first to the point of like whether or not the spaces are like, okay, wait, can we go back to the first one before
Yeah.
COVID? Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, tell us a little bit, because I know that you started Superposition in with a little bit of a mind towards not trying to be part of this wave of kind of gentrifying art and cultural real estate activity.
Right. Yeah. So the main goal was I was already working in these spaces. Like I was working at Spruce Moggers, which was across from the LACMA. So that was like a huge cultural hub that was like I was seeing in real time all these different artists and curators coming through this space that has an international presence as well, represents global artists that are blue chip up the wazoo, and is directly across from a museum that is like one of the most famous places where I grew up in this city. And yet I'm sitting in this position as a gallery assistant and thinking, oh shit. Like I wasn't thinking, oh, this is going to be like so groundbreaking and like some amazing new concept is going to come out of this ecosystem that I'm witnessing right now. And that was because I was witnessing a lot of homeless people on the street of Miracle Mile, um, and there was nobody actually coming into the gallery. And this was across the board. This wasn't just for Spruce Moggers. Like their program is very well attended. But it was just like the time period of art in Los Angeles.
Hmm.
And it was like also the Boyle Heights era when things were starting to get really crazy, when Laura Owens was being attacked. It was like the height of anti-gentrification and radical ways to fight displacement. But then that was also cutting off the conversation. So there was no way to actually have these people communicate, and actually do something about it. So it was like divest from art fully and don't do anything to change it. Just don't participate in it, or like cave in and like be a part of the problem and like take money from your parents and like work for a really low salary at this job that everybody's telling you is great when it's not. And so like those were those two camps that I was faced with of like, well, I don't really want to listen to either of those types of people. So yeah, it kind of came out of that and art for art's sake not seeming to be the focus anymore. On top of it, it was like if artists don't feel like these spaces were created for them to feel safe to create something radical that could change minds, like that's the whole point of having a gallery is to create those spaces for artists. So if that's no longer what the space is there for, and it's just a commercial facade that looks really trendy, then that's not really doing its job anymore. So yeah, superposition was born out of that lack or like that hope that like that wasn't the direction galleries would go in. And it was kind of like a posing like a new way for galleries to revitalize this idea of like looking at their artists as people they want to actually help, continue to help and not get caught up in the other parts of it that seem to be very glorified and used right now and will continue to always. But like, how can we make it so that a majority of the galleries have an option that's not just those two that I was describing?
Hmm.
Yeah.
And how did it evolve over the pandemic? When I think to a certain extent, it seemed to me that superposition had a model that I expected more galleries or other curators or other people to potentially follow because it presented an opportunity to be like, oh, look, we were already free of certain a number of physical constraints, or at least one major one for many galleries, which is, the need to cut a rent check every month in order to, keep a space in order to exhibit work, which is often for many galleries the sort of the big fear and driver of their commercial activities. So if you eliminate that and you create this more virtual wrapper, and then you have a global pandemic which shuts everything down and makes that virtual wrapper the sort of only wrapper that anybody has access to or is seen, it seemed like it would be you would see a lot more of it. I'm curious your opinion, why we haven't seen more attempts or a larger wave of, let's say, nomadic galleries or nomadic exhibition platforms, or for lack of a better way of describing it, sort of a way of creating a brand wrapper for what it is that you or other people might be doing in order to support artists, offer exhibition opportunities for their work, create dialogue, but free of
Mhm.
a permanent constraint in terms of real estate.
Yeah, yeah, I think a huge part of it is the language too, like how we're disseminating information of like what's happening in the art world right now. Like people aren't taking the word nomadic as a position of power in the way that they could. And I think that that would help galleries like restructure that it's not out of an inability to afford real estate. It's like an intentional choice
Yep.
to help restructure the fabric of our neighborhoods and like our communities. And galleries are like one of the first catalysts for that. So I think during COVID, it was more so people really capitalized off of everyone wanting to re-beautify the walls that they were stuck living in. And it wasn't so much about the spaces that will hold the art for an exhibition. It was about what can I hold on to because the world's never opening back up again because we just didn't know. But that was also a time where I made the most sales. It was also during George Floyd. It was a time where DEI was something that people all of a sudden cared about and used that term on a daily basis. And now it's something that is being defunded left and right. And that's exactly why I think these types of programs stay around, because during these swings of back and forth support and lack thereof, this idea still stands. You know, it's like artists are always going to be pushed out of the places that they've beautified. Galleries are always going to have a choice of whether or not to support the artist or support the consumer. So yeah, I think galleries right now have a great opportunity to jump on the bandwagon finally. And I think there are actually some places that are starting to understand it and see it not as a weakness, but as a strength. Art fairs are now accepting our gallery, and that was a big part of it too, was, you know, the programming having to be as up to par as a gallery with a brick and mortar, like saying that we didn't necessarily support artists' careers if we didn't do like longer shows. So that was something that we just had to restructure, where I focused more on solo exhibitions than group shows for about a year. And then that was like enough to show that like we were doing our research, and not just applying to fairs willy-nilly.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think that too helped where, okay, if Freeze Los Angeles takes superposition seriously, maybe I also don't need a space to be able to do this,
Right.
and would trickle down in that way, even if the original dinosaurs don't want to do that. But I mean, we've been getting some great people wanting to offer their space, and like maybe not necessarily other bigger galleries, but other organizations, other real estate companies too, when that's kind of the funny part of it, where it's like we're not interested in renting or buying anything, and yet real estate companies want us there for free. It's
Yeah.
like, it's just so wild once you even pose a different question, like what ends up coming out of the woodwork of a neighborhood.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, the point about the real estate companies, I mean, I remember some years ago, this was sort of in the wake, I think, of the 2008 financial crisis when you saw similar types of upheavals within the real estate industry. Uh, there was a lot of store frontage in New York City that was empty, and there was a organization called No Longer Empty, which, specifically kind of targeted street level commercial real estate opportunities in order to mount exhibitions, and it was a win-win, good place for artists to be able to show work and interesting projects which wouldn't otherwise work within a commercial environment where you had to keep paying rent. And the real estate companies like it because, at the end of the day, a lot of those places, they don't like having empty stuff, right? Like it's easier for them to find longer term tenants, and also just from a sort of security and activity standpoint to have people using their spaces rather than having them, soaped up windows and just empty in the background. And it sort of seems like that I moved to San Francisco 6, 8, 7 months ago, and I can tell you, sort of driving around San Francisco, it's not nearly as destitute as the major media hubs would want you to believe. But there's a lot of real estate opportunity in downtown San Francisco, right? I mean, right next door to brand new flagship luxury outposts of like Chanel, there is a smaller storefront that's got a big four lease sign in it. I'm like, this is a great opportunity for somebody,
Exactly.
right? Like
Is
that should
that
be there should be art in there.
and that's the thing, is that these places aren't afforded by anyone, so they're gonna stay empty. So
Right.
it's kind of like, yeah, sure, like we'll use it.
Right. And it's
Um,
almost easier for those companies. It's easier for the real estate managers or the owners to provide the space for free to an arts organization and to an exhibition platform than it is for them to actually rent it at a sub-market rate where all of a sudden that resets what the real estate can be offered for, right? I mean, everyone's sort of like sitting on it, hoping for an opportunity to kind of, get their returns as they necessarily should. But it does seem like a great opportunity for more galleries and gallery platforms to do this kind of nomadic work and take advantage of maybe, giving artists new opportunities and building new audiences in the meantime.
yeah, because it really is just a reaction to a problem. Like if these spaces were affordable and these places were still like a neighborhood like it was in the 60s, where you could rely on your mom and pop store, like I wouldn't necessarily have to come up with this concept.
Right.
It's reaction to. It's not like, oh, this is better than the original idea. It's like this is a reaction to all of the horrible ways that they've messed up real estate for our population. And like this is a solution to that.
Why do you
Um,
think it took so long for the art fairs to come around to providing opportunities to a platform like yours?
well, I think part of it was just advocacy and awareness, like people speaking up for me and saying, no, this is a good program. You should talk with her. Like you should look that application over again, those kind of things. I mean, I can't really say because I don't know still like what it necessarily was that all of a sudden changed their mind, but I just kept my head down and kept applying. Um, but yeah, I think it was mostly just trying to meet as many people as I could who had participated before, um, asking their opinion on like if my application looked good. And a lot of the times they would say like your application looks great, it looks fine, so I don't know why you're not getting in. So I think it was just like all of a sudden they were like, all right, she's been around.
Right. You're not going away, right? You're gonna, so
Yeah, I think that's another part of it is just how long are people really going to try and do this stuff and how much do they care about it? And is it a passion project or is it a project that you're doing with a lot of passion, you know?
yeah. But it also seems, I mean, it seems odd too because so many of the fairs have their kind of section dedicated for new entrants to the space, right? Something that's been less than, say, 3 years in the in the ecosystem, and in order to kind of give those new entrants a leg up, but at the same time, it's like, but you have to have had a physical space and done so many exhibitions and some of the criteria seem like they're at cross purposes with one another, or could be at cross purposes.
Yeah, like I think with Freeze Los Angeles, it was nice because they uplifted the gallery when the artist that I was exhibiting is already established, I would say. Like the focus section was to uplift the program itself and like give them a leg up in being able to represent artists such as,
Hmm.
which like who they put in the focus section. And I think it was for most cases like that. Like across from us was Edgar Arsenault, like he's super established in museums, but he showed with a smaller gallery from Minneapolis.
Hmm.
Now they're on the map, which is awesome. So I think that was like the first time I saw that model happen and it was successful. And I think more fairs need to do that, rather than being like, oh, we have to wait for the gallery and the artist to be successful in order to give them any platform. Because at the end of the day, with the Instagram algorithm and how all of this is a popularity contest in a sense, I think that emerging and established and like blue chip and which sector of gallery you're in at these fairs gets very flattened.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah.
It'll be a real innovation when the fair just divides it up by price point.
Yeah, and I think that's really what it is at this point. I mean, it's gotten very expensive for us very quickly, and it's like, I'm very excited that I'm getting these opportunities now, but I didn't know how much it cost because I was never invited
Right.
to know what the price was.
Right.
So like I'm thinking, oh, I'm invited, like, oh, I'm getting a grant, and it's like, no, you're paying dollars. They're like,
Right.
we upgraded you to the gallery sector. I'm like, great. Oh, it's like $10,000 more. Oh,
Yeah, exactly.
can't not do it.
Congratulations, you get to pay us more.
Yeah, I'm not gonna not do it, but like,
Yeah,
yeah. So there's just been different levels of going into debt and like going out of it and like wanting to invest in a certain project for an artist. Um, and then just knowing that like it will pay off. And yeah, I think the fairs finally have this mark of approval process for me that I didn't appreciate before. Because we would just do pop-ups like in tangent with it. And I don't know if I necessarily think that it's bad that it took this long because it does kind of give us a whole other breath of like, okay, a new way to do the program. We're just only thinking about these specific fairs and we're being more selective when
Hmm.
before I was way more experimental with it because I had to be, um, because we were just making things up as we went along.
Where do you see superposition in 5 years? Do you ever toy with the idea of getting a permanent space?
No, because the whole mission statement is everywhere and nowhere. I think for any permanent space conversation, it would be about a foundation or some type of residency, or some type of collection that has to do with legacy, like separate from the gallery. But in terms of superposition, 5 years from now, I see us at the Biennale. Um, I see us doing Art Basel, Switzerland, just moving up in the ranks, but also having the roster feel really strong all around. Right now, I think a lot of artists that we've worked with are still watching and waiting for us to have a good bandwidth of people to support them, which is totally understandable because it's still just me and like contracted assistants, depending on which city we're in. So I want to be able, and we have a PR team as well. So like two journalists that like help us with our press releases. Um, but I would like 5 years from now to be able to say that like I'm just working on the curatorial vision and other people are doing all of this administrative stuff. Yeah.
Understandable.
Storm, how would you describe the collector base of Superposition?
Oh, it's so eclectic. International, all ages, and very curious. Yeah, everybody's very curious and comes from very different backgrounds. Like, I wouldn't necessarily say that they're all art enthusiasts. Um, like they might have come into it because they met me at a conference for like banking, and they like just started collecting. Also just through traveling. I've met a lot of people in different countries that like have never met an artist or been to one of my shows, but just see stuff on Artsy because I showed it to them when I was on a cruise one time. Like it's just like the most random people. And then there's like the heavy hitting like Kent Kelly's of the world who's on like the top 200 art news collectors. People like that too, which is great. And I'm trying to expand our collector base in terms of institutions. That's really a focus that I want to instill once I start hiring a sales team. Um, because yeah, I'm definitely more of the mission based, like studio visit person. Like I'm more the art forward person of superposition, even though I'm doing it all. Like I need to have a real sales team that enjoys sales. Because I'm like, no, I don't want the piece to go. I love it, which isn't helpful at all.
Um, I mean, having such an eclectic group of clientele, what's something that, let's just say people who are not super wealthy and maybe aren't super experienced collectors, like what's something you wish they knew or understood or thought that maybe they don't, and likewise for people who are wealthy, especially when it comes to collecting emerging artists.
Mm. Yeah, I'd say that investing in art is really more so of an emotional investment. I think a lot of people originally come into it thinking, oh, is this like a similar thing to like an auction of jewelry or like some memorabilia. But really it's something that should be protected for your family. Like I think it's important to not come into art to collect it based off of it as an investment. Um, and to constantly remember that it's about the enjoyment of the work because a lot of artists interact with their collectors. I think that's another part of this that's been flattened um, in this day and age with the art market. So it is really an emotional buy. And like, depending on your interactions with these artists, because you're going to the same events as they are in this contemporary context, like, you could feel very different about your work from one day to another when you come home to it. So, yeah, just depending on how involved you are with the community that you're supporting, um, yeah, just investing in it for the right reasons.
What is the sort of biggest logistical hurdle that you have to get over every time you're doing an exhibition? What's the like the thing that feels like the biggest lift or the biggest challenge given the nomadic model?
It's the shipping. It's always shipping. It's just like the
So that's no different than a brick and mortar gallery.
thing is, at the end of the day, like there's still storage, there's still movement of artwork, there's still insurance clauses, there's still like quotes that you have to give to clients um, for the movement of artwork. There's installation of artwork in a client's home. There's like site visits. So all of that kind of plays into it as well. That makes it not just a pop-up. There's
Right.
like all the logistical things that we're doing um, outside of like the dates of the shows. So yeah, in that sense, I'd say like we're very focused on trying to figure out trying to figure out like a streamlined way to show sculpture that are in all these different locations. We work with Alex Anderson, and his ceramics are like very fragile, delicate pieces. We're bringing them all over the world, so it's like really important for us to be able to like have a streamlined understanding of how his work should be packed. Um, and like bringing it from Miami to LA or LA to New York, there's all these different rules with customs and things like that too. So yeah, there's like a lot of different changes happening with like shipping companies right now too, and like different tariffs. So I'm constantly like changing companies. Yeah, that's another part of it. And I think it's something that can't really be fixed by the model that I'm doing. It's like a whole other issue, like environmental issues, you know, and the whole like cost of all these things, like using cardboard over and over again, like what people do with the crate. That's a bunch of storage questions that like I can't even begin to fathom because like we don't have space. So yeah, we're always storing with different companies, and then trying to figure out if we can trust them for the next shipment. It's just like um, there aren't a lot of favors either, like because insurance values are so high. Like it's not something that you could just be like, oh, I know this company. Oh, they're good for it. Like you really just have to be like dotting every I.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, there's not really like I know there's like art handler mag or this or that, like different ways to like transport work that's creative, but like I can't really go that route because I'm already like on the line for not having space. So I want everybody to feel like, everything else is above board. Not that not having the space isn't above board, but like if that's one drawback or something that makes someone hesitant for working with us, at least everything else is like
Right.
what they would want to expect.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
nomadic can be a mission. It's not just a an economic innovation, right? And it's not just
Right.
trying to figure out how to reduce costs, where all of a sudden you see yourself reducing costs in all these other places, and then that becomes the brand, right? Which is not what you
Right.
want to have it
Yeah.
associated with.
Yeah, no, yeah, because it's not like, oh, everything on the cheap. Like you'll still get a crate, but it's coming from Little Ethiopia. It's not coming from Crocher, but yeah,
Right.
it's still a crate. Um, but no, yeah, I think a big part of the logistics too could be innovated in a lot of ways. Like some things that galleries do nowadays is like share on a consolidated shipment. Um, or we'll like split booth costs. There's different things that can like lower that footprint too. But I think the main focus for me has just been the space footprint because I'm so worried about the works being damaged because they have to move around so much because we don't have a permanent space. So like they just have to be protected at all costs. Um, so yeah, there's like drawbacks and different things that could like be innovated from it. Yeah.
Good. Knock knock. Anybody who's listening.
Yep. Exactly.
Storm, I'm
But yeah,
curious,
but
if with a gallery that moves locations all of the time, how do you approach marketing and promotion when you kind of have to reinvent that a little bit for every show that you do? And also, you may have like been building up a collector base or what have you. I would imagine in New York, for sure. But then you go to this other place and, you got to drive audience, but also convert audience, right, into collectors. So like, yeah, what talk us through, you've decided to do a new show in a new place. Like what does the marketing strategy look like? And then, like how do you capitalize on the people that come in the door?
yeah, so for Chicago right now, we were talking with Expo, like the main fair that we're working with. They have like their own PR teams. So like each fair has like a communications team that we're supposed to send like all of our information to. So it's nice because at the beginning of doing these types of fairs, I was still doing all of my own PR, and just kind of making press releases based off of just what I thought and how it was going to go for us, and not necessarily in the context of these larger organizations. And I think that has also helped my understanding of like how to place what we're doing in the broader context of things so that it's not just like, oh, it's the other show over here. It's part of this larger ecosystem. And one thing that was really successful this year for us was these focus on solo shows and focus on these stories of the artists I was working with and not so much on the group of superposition, but like why one person relates to superposition or like what about their story is superposition. So that was like a cool strategy that has been rolling out nicely. And we worked with like Colossal Magazine, and then like Caribbean Life News when we worked with Patrizia and Canarcion. So like we were also thinking about not just like art media outlets, but outlets that think about a specific concept. Like maybe Alex Anderson would do something with a magazine that focuses on ceramics or like Japanese history. So yeah, just trying to like expand beyond just like artsy art listicles, even though those are great for us during the fairs. Um, and I think also working with a PR company that has a hospitality branch, it was a big help with us. Purple PR also works with like the Edition hotels, like Public Hotel. They work with some musicians as well and like makeup and like hospitality companies that do like design. So I think that's also why we were able to access like broader audiences that travel a lot because they work with hospitality. So it was like, oh, we might actually know a building that you can use while you're in this location, even though they don't necessarily even know those people there. It was just like this broader connection by working or like reaching into other industries that wouldn't necessarily even know about the art fair at all. And we're just like, oh, cool, yeah, like have a panel here. And then like their network of people would come, and that's all of a sudden a new collector base that otherwise wouldn't have even gone to the fair at all. So yeah, I think also diversifying like what type of PR people you would work with is how we like diversified our audience. And it wasn't so much just art reviews. It was travel, food, like yeah, different things.
What do you think having such a location agnostic fan base and collector base, what do you think that positions you for in the future that somebody who just running a gallery in LA or whatever is not going to have? What, like
Sounds like
there's
starting a
probably some
band.
drawbacks. What?
It sounds like starting a band.
I mean, I feel like there would be some drawbacks to having like, people all over the place, and maybe like you just can't get them all to a show or something like that. But there's got to be some side effect that's great about it, right? So what do you feel like
Yeah.
it enables you to do or will enable you to do in the future that you think a single location gallery is not going to be able to do?
Yeah, I think there's definitely this feeling of like we're able to kind of like summon, like there's this feeling of like if we're having an exhibition or we have an announcement of something coming, like people will make the effort and make the trip to go. And it's thought of as this like limited time thing. Like it's kind of like a like I don't know, like it's like a cult following of something, but it's open to everyone, even though the feeling of that is like similar to like fish concerts, I guess. I've never been to one, but in that same realm of like, oh, people know about it that know about it and will always make the effort to go. So I think we have a core group like that. Like for the Hamptons this summer. There's a group that will always show up for us, and like artists that will always come back to that specific museum that we did a project with, right? So like I think on that in a grander scale could happen. And in another sense, I was thinking also about like space travel, which is completely separate, but like just this idea of the type of client of superposition where it's like everywhere and nowhere like would also go to a museum on Mars or like want to do something like that. So in that same sense, like someone that's that curious for art that makes you uncomfortable, and not in the sense of like the subject matter, but like it's uncomfortable to even get to the art or like be able to appreciate it because the way to get there means that you have to do something unconventional that's like tricky. So yeah, like people that would go out of their way to still experience it. Yeah.
Yeah. As someone who's been to a 3-day fish festival, no,
Of
no.
course you have.
I'm so sorry if I said something.
No. No, I was going to say, I think like that experience, as well as, I also traveled to Prague to see my favorite band play there. And like, I don't know that performance was anything, more mind blowing than other ones I had seen, but that show will always mean a lot to me because I flew to Prague, to go to it. It just becomes like this really kind of historic thing I did, right? Like, and so it'll always be kind of special. So if you have people, traveling or, in the case of Fish, camping for 3 days to see a show, once you put in that kind of effort, like the show becomes more meaningful.
Mhm. No, totally. And I think that's why I'm excited for this summer because it's kind of this like culmination of many years that we didn't meet up because of COVID and like different reasons. But I think it was mostly like we had this great convening. Um, and then there was kind of like there was no point where everybody was like, okay, this has officially started. It was kind of like, all right, let us know whenever this will start up again or when this actually is going to be a thing. So now that there's like traction for the gallery, there's also traction for like the mission statement that was born out of it, which is the Hamptons Black Arts Council, and this whole idea of like wanting to promote other Black institutions that get like overlooked. So in that same sense too, like taking the energy that people have for superposition shows and bringing that to a historic archival little museum in Sag Harbor that people used to walk past. Um, and now making it where it's something that Vic Mensa wants to go to. It's like that's something that I feel like is actually making the change, more so than me selling the artwork for the artists that I'm exhibiting. And I know that that's like huge. Like we're still like living off of this, but I think artists that I work with would also say like some of the more important work that they've done with us is those types of community projects, um, where people are making this effort to go and have this experience or like a residency or retreat.
Have you
Well,
ever,
I'm down
sorry, go
here in
ahead, Joey.
Oaxaca whenever you guys are ready to come down here, let me know.
That's awesome, actually.
Oaxaca is like an art mecca. It's so like there's murals on like half of the walls in this town.
Did you go there?
There's got to be a higher density of galleries in this town per capita than I think anywhere I've ever been. It's amazing.
Oh my gosh. Did we go there with Sotheby's? Did we go to
No, we did
Oaxaca?
not go to Oaxaca.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Um,
It's
I mean, it was Mexico City and Culiacan and the area sort of right around there. We never made it down to Oaxaca. I'm curious, there's something you mentioned earlier about having the model allowing for exhibitions or putting on shows in places that may be unconventional, right? That can create a kind of sense of discomfort or a sense of disruption to the more status quo thing. And on the one hand, I totally get it where, these places like hospitality, where it's sort of food and lodging and travel, all that stuff makes perfect sense, right? And I think that there's a real drive for that. I think it makes there's a very good logic to it, and I'm surprised that more galleries, artists, and players aren't pursuing it in a similar in a similar fashion. But it's sort of curious. I mean, one of the things that I don't think you can any longer do, but one of the things that we used to do was go to that James Turrell in the Louis Vuitton store in Las Vegas, right? Vegas itself is not necessarily an art mecca, although I think there's like super interesting stuff that was happening there, and there are artists that were located there, so it was certainly a great place to see what kind of artistic culture can crop up even in the most unlikely of places. And this was pre-Sphere, so I think the Sphere itself is a kind of an amazing venue and locale for a whole bunch of different opportunities. Um, but the Louis Vuitton Turrell experience was one where it was like not necessarily that you were uncomfortable going in, but there was a real kind of um, dissonance between those two experiences, right? This sort of high-end luxury shopping mall experience, plus then this totally stripped down, reductive, meditative, James Turrell, light and space, Gansfeld
Right.
experience. So the juxtaposition of those two, I think, was particularly apt. But I was sort of curious from your standpoint. It's like if you think about pursuing similar types of sort of like unconventional locales, right? As you were also talking, I was remembering like a performance work that uh, an artist did. I can't remember exactly who now, but it took place inside of the what is now the Google co-location headquarters in like on 23rd Street in Manhattan. And so it was like this bizarre, like you're basically like in a performance inside of a server farm in the middle of Manhattan, which just felt totally bizarre, right? And then there was this kind of performance reading going on inside of this space. And so I was curious, like, you know, on the one hand, you need conventional exhibition spaces like the ones that you've shown in, whether they be art fairs or like a Phillips showroom. But on the other hand, have you thought about or think about pursuing these kinds of unconventional locales where it really does become a kind of um, reunion is not the right word, but this like a kind of pilgrimage type of thing where it's like, for the people who are dedicated or really want a different type of experience, they're willing
Right.
to go the extra mile in whatever city or whatever place it is that you're thinking about doing. I think Desert X is kind of an example of this too, where it's like you do this thing out in you do this thing out in the desert and it's like, it can't exist but for the internet and the ability to disseminate images and make it visible. So it has this very distributed, mediated world that it relies on to get the word out. But then people make their pilgrimage, right? And they go out and they do this thing and see it on site. And it's, I think, people get a kick out of it.
Yeah. Well, there's the Orange Barrel Media Group that I've always loved so much because they're all around the country and they do these projects with us and a lot of different artists and galleries actually where they give free ad space to organizations showing art in between when they're showing advertisements that they're getting paid to show. So it's like a bunch of different billboards, and some of them are really cool and like structurally interesting too. So it's kind of like these public sculptures that are showing these digital screens of
Sure. Was there one of those like on, is that the big one on Sunset that's at that funky,
this.
shard looking type of thing? Yeah.
So Jessica Taylor Bellamy has done a project on that. Greg Ito, I think, just did one too. And then we had the Phillips Los Angeles show up on their TCL Chinese Theater billboards. So like places like that, or like Outfront Media we worked with during Black History Month. So like all of the different MTA systems throughout the country like had superposition artists artwork on it. So it was like while you're traveling to work. So that was kind of
Amazing.
it's like while you're in flux. But I definitely think like things like Desert X or like Upstate Art Weekend that Helen Toomer is doing, like those are projects that I really respect. And I think are kind of the bloomed out version of what it would look like if more galleries did what I'm doing. Like I think more projects like Desert X and you know, biennials even could like start blossoming into like bigger things and people wouldn't be so siloed into like their eponymous galleries and wanting to just focus on that. And there's still, I mean, there's still like space for that. It's like I don't think that it's wrong to be like, I like this and I want to promote these things because this is my taste in this
Right.
beauty. Like that's also totally fine.
Right.
But I think if we're thinking about these bigger ways of affecting culture,
Yeah.
like yeah.
I also think about it in terms of how do you take advantage of other sort of adjacent i- interests, right? So it sort of shocks me that, for example, you don't see more contemporary art programming or interesting stuff happening around something like South by Southwest Festival, right? Like, music, a music festival that has arguably blossomed into more of a sort of art and cultural and music, platform where talks and performances and it's like the Texas answer to the sort of like I don't know the Atlantic Festival or some high-minded thing that might happen in Manhattan, but I'm like, what? Like, I mean, somebody should hop on that, right? I mean, it's like it would just, I mean, they'd be, even if it's just adjacent program and it's happening, you get like a old theater or something like that and put on a show. And I mean, there's a built-in audience of folks who want to find out what this hip thing is going to be that's off the conference schedule itself, and it becomes its own kind of phenomenon. It's just seems like a no-brainer.
No, it's weird because I feel like a lot of times where I'm invited somewhere as like I'm invited kind of as a representative from my industry to something, but not
Right,
necessarily speak or be involved. And it's kind of like, oh yeah, they do art, like they should come, but like
right,
it's not included in like the grand scheme of like different pillars of industries.
right,
And it's like, I think in the same vein, it's kind of like, okay, well, South by Southwest probably thinks that all the films are art already, and there isn't a
right,
further to be had. And it's
right.
like, yes, there is.
Yeah. Right.
It's kind of like that. Like, I don't know, there could be a whole panel about what artwork we saw in all the movies,
Right.
and there, but at the same time, like, I think that's also where it gets difficult to define art as fine art
Sure.
versus things outside of it. Like, and when artists start drawing lines of, okay, well, this is me in my painting hat, or this is me, I'm moving on to music.
Right.
And I don't want to be called this anymore because that's a different artist or something. And
Yeah.
it's, I don't know, like for me, all of it is coming out of the same place. Like my gallery, like my own art. Like I used to dance and sing, like I love theater, like it all comes from the same place. So I always also feel really weird when I'm not seeing people connect these dots across the industries. And I feel like it comes from, once again, wanting to like label and silo and like be like, stay in your lane. And like, I don't
Yeah.
really have a solution besides just being like, we'll call it superposition. Let us be participating somehow in all these
Yeah.
different. The
Yeah,
Met
it's
Gala,
interesting.
like the Met Gala has like the the dandy theme this year, like the black dandy. And I'm just like, where are the artists? Why are they what? Like it just made it's crazy. Um, Especially since it's at a museum. Like
True.
those are the types of things where I'm like, what? Um, but yeah, Pharrell, he's in art now, so that makes a little sense. But yeah.
Storm, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about Storm the person, less so about the gallery, but what's a kind of pivotal moment that in your career that you don't talk about very often?
Hmm. Pivotal that I don't talk about. Probably, probably when I got my art table award, actually, um, which was last year in LA during Freeze LA. Um, I guess because it was an award that I didn't understand like how big of a deal it was, like, and the history of the award and the other people that had been awarded prior. Um, and like it felt different the way that I was accepting it compared to other things. Like, because I got Forbes 30 under 30, right, in like 2022, but something about that was um it felt like very hype beasty, like magazine PR cool. And like that was the first experience I had of like, I don't know, being recognized in the press like that or anything. And that came itself with a lot of pressure, but like it didn't give me the same feeling that the Art Table Award gave, which was it took me a while to even understand it myself, like what it means now to have the award and like what I'm supposed to do with it. Um, and that's because it's titled New Leadership. And I feel like with other listicles or things that people get put on, like when it says like, oh, you're rising this or like, the emerging curators, like the new generation of this or that, um, it kind of blanket gives this pressure of like, oh, you have to like now you're the cool kid, you have to keep doing this and keep being new. But for this award, it was like new leadership, which kind of made me feel like older, like, okay, I'm a leader, like I can like help other people do stuff like this. And not so much like, oh, look at this little thing who's rising her way up. Like it didn't have the same, I don't know, some of these listicles can seem a little patronizing, even though they like are giving you these opportunities. It still is like, good job, little sis, or whatever. And this one was, just leadership. And I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, that's now something that I can call myself. And it's not like um, it's not like a maybe. It's like, this is a fact. It's not like, oh, look out for this person, see if they crash or burn,
Yeah.
you know?
Well,
Right.
Yeah.
it's like 30 under 30 is like, the best thing you could do there is just not get older.
Yeah.
Right, right is like because once you're 31, it's like, well, okay, so if you can't, it's like something you can't control, you're no longer part of that qualification. Whereas the art table one is recognition for a kind of responsibility and membership in a real community. That's like saying, hey, now you, yeah,
Like,
yeah,
But
yeah,
it also, oh, go ahead.
sorry.
I was just going to say it doesn't feel like it would come with the same level of pressure to like keep reinventing yourself. Like it's now giving you credit for what you've done already and your ability to pass that knowledge on to others and to affect, their ability to iterate and reinvent themselves and things like that, as opposed to like feeling some pressure that like, you need to do something totally crazy so that you could be on the Forbes 40 under 40 list or whatever, right?
Well, that's like the next thing I've been thinking about is just like, oh God, like I turned 30 this year. Does Forbes even want to talk to me ever
yeah,
again?
yeah, exactly.
But
You're out. Just wait till
and
you're
like,
part of like the 70 over 70 list, right? It's like,
yeah, and also like I hope they don't reach out asking for numbers if like I projected like something that didn't happen. But I was a very aspiring 24-year-old.
yeah, it's funny. This is apropos of nothing in a way, but I was in a conversation last night and people were talking about uh, uh, down aging themselves on dating apps. Right, in order to beat the algorithm and the filters that people put in there in terms of how old it is that people want to meet people on. And so it just all of a sudden made me think of like, oh right, there's like a whole PR correlate to that where people are like downshifting their age in order to still qualify for these listicles from the list makers. I'd be like, no, 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 no.
Yeah, and yeah, that pressure you're saying of reinventing yourself and like for me lately, back to this PR point has been like I want people to stop saying like this new young black woman curator. I'm like,
Right,
I'm not new.
right,
Like yes, all these things like are true, but like that's not new anymore. And there's a lot of young black women curators like me now that are not new either now. So
right.
it's very like, okay, we've been here. And
Right. I
also
mean, 2028 is right around the corner,
yeah,
and at that point, it'll be a decade in operation, which usually for most galleries is like a big, it's like you're a staple of the environment.
exactly. So yeah, I've been pushing as much as I can to not highlight this like young, new black Jewish woman thing. And like that just is what it is. But pushing more on it's nomadic. What does superposition mean? Like the original first things I was saying 7 years ago, 10 years ago, really. But like having people actually say that themselves now. When before it was just me saying it a lot and people being like, cool, so you have a gallery. I'm like, no. So yeah, now the language I feel like is way more intentional in that way.
But you say you want people to stop calling you that, but the first time you see an article that's talking about someone else and saying that they're rising up to push out the old guard like Storm Asher, you're gonna be like, oh.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
just called me the old guard.
You
It's all
wild.
relative. It's all relative.
I mean, if they call me the old guard, then they have to start letting me sell like $20 million works. But you can't have both. Like you can't close me out of those deals. And
Yep.
yeah.
Right. I have another Storm Asher personal question. Storm, if you could have anybody in the world as a mentor, who would you love to work with and learn from?
Besides Jonathan, what?
I can attest to that
Other
being
than
quite
me.
useful, actually.
Um, hmm, as a mentor, I think Thelma Golden would be crucial. Yeah, I really want to like get to know her better on like a more personal level because she's just so powerful. And I think what she's done is just so historic and crazy. And being at the helm of such a crazy institution that really has like is globally famous for being a neighborhood spot, which is interesting and kind of the antithesis of what I do, but in the same way isn't because it's about legacy and museum stewardship and not necessarily commercially. So yeah, I would love to be able to like be more casually in conversation with her about how a span of years like that with an institution and with a mission, like how it affected her personally. I think that'd be an interesting conversation. And I see her all the time. She's so cool and so lovely, but she's just like surrounded by all the people that want to be around her, you know? And like I'm the type of person, especially being from LA, where like I see that happen a lot and I always go the opposite direction because I don't want to bother someone. When
Totally.
I that they're like famous or this or that, I'm like, I'm going this way. So yeah, I think I would love to talk to her more and be less shy around her.
In
Jonathan.
Yeah, I was just gonna, it's a different personal anecdote, but in this will date me, but in 1995 or 1996, Thelma was a curator at the Whitney, I think, still, and was teaching a contemporary art class at Cornell University that I took. It was for the art students, and there were like 12 art students, and I was the one lone architect taking this class with Thelma. And it was like very bizarre because the students were doing these art projects and I was trying to, be a critic or a writer or something like that. And this was a long time ago. This is before Thelma was Thelma, but she was already fairly, established figure. And there were also a couple of New York City visits that we went to, and she took us to Leon Golub and Nancy Spiro's studio in Soho that year, which I still remember being, pretty extraordinary. And I just, I had no clue. I hadn't spent a lot of time in New York at that point. I was still a college kid and just tromping around trying to get the feel of the place. So, and the really, remarkable thing is that Thelma has not aged a bit. She looks exactly the
Right.
same now as she did like 40 years, 30 years ago, which is
No,
just always extraordinary to me.
I think that's really someone that I look to as like she has the longevity.
Yeah.
She's been around so many different stories and started so many different people's stories.
Yeah.
And just like to imagine the different things she's probably heard, not even things that she herself has done, but even the things that she's witnessed is probably just, yeah, I would
Yeah.
just fangirl.
She's my vote for the to take over from Glenn Lowry at MoMA, but I don't know if she'll leave studio. We'll see. We'll see who the candidates are. But she would definitely be a great figure in that role.
Yeah, I mean, they've been doing a lot of partnerships.
Yeah.
Studio is
And she
closed.
knows all the players. She knows all, I mean, it's like all the same boards and trustees. And so it's not like it's not a new thing.
Right.
She could handle it well, or other than, different than someone coming in from a different city in the US or even European, who would have to sort of get to know who that New York board is and the role that it plays.
Is that like a thing that's being voted on right now?
Well, Lowry announced his retirement, and so it's, I think they must be doing a search.
Wow.
It's got to be happening soon. I don't know when. I may be behind. Maybe they've already. I don't think they've already announced it. That'd be more obvious. But
I'm behind. I'm just like planning my expo show and then I turn around and like different museums are closing. I'm like, ah, it's
I know
happening.
there's a lot of upheaval.
Yeah. And been the other thing is just trying to do the shows while wondering if America's going to exist. So,
Yeah, Glenn is to step down in September 2025. So they've got to be naming a they must be naming a person soon.
wow.
Yep. All right. Should we move to the more opinion segment of the podcast? We've got a couple of questions that we ask everybody, Storm.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. First question. If you had a budget of $10 million that you could use to start something new, unrelated to superposition or Black Arts Council or any of the things that you're currently involved in, what would you choose to do?
Oh, I would make a dance school.
Really?
Mhm.
Why a dance school?
Um, well, I started a nonprofit when I was little, and it was called Heart Base. And I was going to different schools for an after school program for inner city kids, and I was teaching them dance choreography. And it was a bunch of kids that like didn't have anywhere to go after school because like they only had one parent or like were part of like a group that was like further out from where their permitted like school was. So it was just like a bunch of kids that just were stranded at school for like hours and hours. Um, and yeah, I think that there is something about letting out dance after school was like such an important memory for me. And I think I would put money towards like an outlet like that for kids. If it weren't art specifically, like drawing and painting or anything having to do with what I'm doing now, it would be like the performing arts.
Nice.
Yeah. And
My
yeah, $10
sister
million.
owns a dance school. You don't need $10 million to do that.
I don't know, they could have great outfits.
That's true. She's always complaining about the high price of good costumes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I remember the costumes are crazy. And then like, it's a school, but it could also like dance moms is a whole thing. But when it comes traveling to perform, like that was always something really special and memorable. Um, I think that kids should be able to experience earlier on in life, like traveling to do something for someone else. Um, yeah, I think that would be cool. Like a traveling dance school that's like has like a company of kids between New York and Los Angeles and Europe or I don't know, in Africa, and they all kind of like come together and they all learn the same choreography. Yeah, just some type of like healing, um, but very intentional space.
Yeah,
Like it.
my sister's school takes kids to Disneyland to perform every year,
I
which is
love
always like
that.
a huge
Yeah.
highlight of the year for them. So yeah, she takes like I don't even know how many kids, but dozens and dozens of kids down to Disneyland, and they have performances there.
Oh my
Um,
God.
so yeah, that's something that she's been doing for years. And my sister also has a scholarship program because I think, and this could maybe goes to the $10 million budget thing, is she can't afford to just willy-nilly give out like hundreds of scholarships, like it would be untenable. But there's so many people who want to take dance classes and for whom it's such a empowering way to yeah, there's just so many benefits, right? I mean, you're learning collaboration, you're learning discipline, you're learning, you're exercising, you're doing all these things. And there, it's just really unfortunate that cost is such a restrictive aspect of being able to do something like that as a kid. The costumes are expensive, the classes are expensive. And so, yeah, she's been doing scholarship programs, but, she can only do like a few of those before it becomes, um,
Oh, I would love to
difficult.
talk
But
to her. That's really cool.
yeah, for sure. She would love
Yeah.
to chat. She was just here for 8 days and we made a good time of Oaxaca.
Where's the school?
She's just outside of Sacramento, California, in a town called Roseville.
Okay, yeah. No, that's wild. Because yeah, ballet is so inaccessible. Like the shoes are so expensive. Like I don't know. And like getting the Russian ballerina lady to like train one-on-one to like step on your back and shit. Like all of that is so hard.
You would love my sister's studio. It's called Divergence Dance Conservatory, and it's she refounded her studio after getting her master's degree and doing her thesis on essentially like more inclusive dance programs because my nephew is autistic and everything from lighting to sound to crowds can be difficult for neurodivergent people. So she studied all kinds of things about how to make dance a more inclusive world, and then started Divergence Dance, which is really welcoming to sort of all parties. And she takes students of all ages, adults, kids, and everything else. But anyways, you would probably love it.
Okay, so I just give all my money to your sister, basically.
For sure. Yeah.
Well, maybe
Um,
maybe I'll take a mill and I'll give the rest to
yeah, I don't know if she wants to be that big, but yeah,
her.
yeah.
Another question. What is a initiative or another artist or project that's happening in the art and cultural space or otherwise that you'd like to give a shout out to or draw attention to?
Yeah. Ooh, let me be intentional with this. So, one person I would like to shout out is John Rivas. Um, he's an amazing sculptor, painter based in New Jersey, and he has started painting with his daughter and making collaborative pieces. So I think that that is amazing. And it's also the first child that is born by a superposition artist.
Ah,
So yeah, there's an interesting collaboration we're thinking about for her future and for his and like that conversation between son and daughter. And yeah, that conversation being through painting rather than talking. Because she's not even talking yet, she's painting.
nice. That's cool. How do people find Rebus's work? Website? Is there
Yeah, he has a website. He's also on our website, Superposition Gallery.
great.
You just type in John Rivas, Rivas.
Perfect. Cool. All right, last question of the more opinions segment. If you could steal one work of art or cultural artifact from anywhere around the world to have for yourself and share just with close friends and families, but you couldn't let anybody else know that you were the acquirer of that thing, what would you take?
It would be the Sybil sculpture from the Met.
Oh, really?
It's
Cool.
yeah, she's like this celestial dancer, and you can't really tell like she's wearing this like dancing skirt. Let me find it online so I can really describe it to you. But she's in this really contorted pose, and it's kind of like a Venus of Urbino style sculpture, but also much more like contemporary in the way that they rendered her body, which is super interesting. Like she kind of looks like an Instagram model, but it's from
Hmm.
like um and she's kind of this like I don't know the right word. I don't want to say like anthropomorphic, but like she's some like chameleon of
Hmm.
things, and I can't tell if she's Jewish or like Middle Eastern, like or black. And yeah, she just looks like this chameleon that reminded me of myself.
Yeah. And is this, and it was that, from visits from being young, having confronted that, or is this something more recently?
This
Is this
was when
good?
I was doing visits to the Met. We would go like every Thursday from like it was like a 3 hour drawing session class that we had. And
Amazing.
yeah, Peter Herstoff, he would take us all around the Met and would just let us pick different things to draw from
So this was
like
during the SVA School of Visual Arts days.
Mhm.
Nice.
Yeah,
Who's the artist?
I'm looking them up. I think it's like a Greek sculpture.
Yeah.
Um,
Is it this William Wetmore, the Libyan Sibyl?
I don't think so. I don't think it's that one.
Met.
The Met's got a couple Sibyls.
It's this one. Where is it? Dancing Celestial. I'll send it to you guys.
All right. All right. That's
But
great.
that's her.
I just love how I think
Oh,
that's like the
Celestial Dancer
fastest.
Devada. Is that the one? No.
Yeah, she's like
That's
is she like contorted to the side?
kind of looks like it, but this is an Indian 11th century sculpture. I don't think it would be the same one you're thinking of.
Okay.
I just love how quickly I think that was the fastest anyone ever has ever answered that question. Like
Yeah,
no,
it's true.
no, no, not even a moment's pause. You knew exactly which piece you wanted.
Yeah, it might be that I remembered these two sculptures together because I drew both of them and during this class. And I think I like drew them together or something. I'll have to look at my Instagram archive because I have it from back in the day, but I deleted it because I didn't want people to see my drawings. So, uh, but yeah, I also started painting again. So that's
Nice.
Nice. Who's that? Whose work is that behind you?
oh, this is Anthony Akínbola or Bunmi as we call him.
Sure.
These are do-rags. So he makes all of his paintings with stretched do-rag material. And
He
I
was
thought,
just here in San Francisco. He gave a talk at the Fog at the art fair. They had an afternoon. He
oh,
um Shanique Smith and Hugo McLeod
wow,
on a panel. Good panel.
cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, Boomy's great. And his partner Audrey also shows with our gallery a lot too. So I love both of their work and them as people. And we've been hanging up a lot of stuff here. I can send you guys some pictures of other stuff I have if you want. But yeah, I think that Sybil piece would probably make the most sense. I just have to find a good photo of it.
Nice. That's a good answer to the answer to that final question. Well, Storm, thank you very much for joining us on the MO podcast. It was great. It's fun to hear more about superposition and what's happening.
Yeah,
And
it's nice. Yeah.
we're looking forward to seeing the evolution of this thing and your transformation from young Black Jewish female curator emerging to grand dame of the arts and cultural establishment.
Drop. That's perfect. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Storm.
Bye. Thank you. Bye, Joey.